Hey, what's up? Welcome back to the Mirror Point. Reality is checking itself. So I was looking at some videos this morning and ran across another video from Frank Turek, on the channel, um, where he's talking about responding really to an audience member. And his channel is cross-examined, by the way, so we'll go ahead and take a look at it. But he's responding to a question from an audience member: if God is good, then why does evil exist? So basically, the problem of evil. So I thought it was interesting to maybe share this video. We can kind of look at it and examine the answers that the Christian pastors give us, the apologists, for the problem of evil, because that's one of the big stickling points with me, especially with the Christian God belief, is how do you explain evil from an all-powerful, all-loving, all-good God that has no constraints in either of those qualities? So we'll take a look at it. Again, like and subscribe to the channel if you're new here, just looking for some new viewers and everything. So yeah, like and subscribe if you like the content. And yeah, let's get into it. Let's go. Yeah, so again, this video is from the Crucible, or actually not the Crucible. What I keep saying that cross-examined. That's the video that we're going to look at from cross-examined. This is Frank Turek. He's the pastor here, and he's always putting up videos with his responses to questions. So yeah, we'll go ahead and get into it. Let me go ahead and play the video.
Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
Hello, my name's Ayo.
Say again?
Ayo.
Ayo. Nice to meet you.
It's a question about suffering. How do you answer a question if someone asks you, if there is a God, why is there so much suffering in the world?
Suffering. So not just, the title is how does he allow evil and suffering, but she asked about suffering, but suffering could be construed as evil, I suppose, if she's talking about, unnecessary suffering. And usually that's how I would frame the question. Why would God allow unnecessary suffering? Because some suffering could be argued as a good thing, like when you go to the gym to work out, when you're pushing the weights, and it's suffering in a way. You're suffering through it, but you're also pushing yourself through the suffering in order to have some good outcome at the end. And so some people may use something like that as an analogy for why God allows suffering, so that we can evolve and grow. There's no evolution or growth without some kind of suffering, leaving your comfort zone, things of that nature. But what I usually like to do is talk about unnecessary suffering. You know what I mean? But anyways, we'll get back into the video.
Excellent question. I had a question like that at the university, or at Michigan State University. In fact, I knew before we ever got to the Q&A that there was an atheist in the audience, because he sat for the entire 2-hour presentation like this.
Yeah, because atheists are so angry. They don't like what they're hearing.
And I had some pretty good jokes in there. And he didn't crack a smile once. So I knew that when the Q&A came up, that there was going to be some trouble. So I said, "Are there any questions?" And his hand shot up right away. I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "If there is a good God, why doesn't he stop all the evil in the world?" I said, "Sir, that is an excellent question. Maybe because if he did, he might start with you." And
oh, wow. What a good quip. What a good comeback. Well, if you're evil, the question still stands. Why does he allow me to exist if I'm evil? Why not ask that question? But just, he's cracking a joke. I get it.
Hey, because we do evil every day. You ever notice that? We're always complaining about somebody else doing evil. Why don't you stop him? Why don't you stop her? We never think of ourselves. If God wanted to stop all the evil in the world, he might start with us.
Okay, but how is that a refutation? Yeah, if we were evil, if we are doing evil things, hypothetically, if we're all evil, then why do we exist? Is God, this is a reflection of God's character, right? So God likes evil to exist because he does what he wants, right? I suppose he creates out of his desire to have a creation around, right? Or was he constrained? Does he have no choice but to create evil? Which one is it? Either way, just pointing this out doesn't really move the needle for me.
And then I said, sir, we could talk about that for semesters in here. We don't have that time. I'd rather show you a 1 minute and 46-second video that will not be a complete answer, but will give you a doorway to an answer. So I'm going to show you the video now, the video I showed him, and then we'll go from there. You guys ready? Okay.
All right, so he's going to show a video. I hope this video isn't cringy. Why can't he just answer the question himself? Why does he need a video? All right. Fuck, this is going to be hard to get through. I already see it. Let's go.
Let's make sure I got the right video here. Are you ready? You got to pay attention. There's a lot going on in 1 minute 46. Here we go.
Is God good? If he is, why is there suffering and evil? Let's assume for the moment that God is all-powerful. This means that God can do anything that is logically possible. So he can create galaxies and subatomic particles and rainforests and humans.
I noticed that they said he can do all things that are logically possible. So God is constrained by logic, it looks like. So there's a definition of God sort of being smuggled in here, that God can't do anything that's logically impossible. But then what is a miracle then? Aren't miracles illogical? That's what makes them so miraculous, right? I mean, I don't get it. Why would you have to say logically possible? Because if you were to say, well, the miracles are actually logically possible, it's that we don't see the logic behind it. Well, why would he need that? If he can do anything, then it just kind of weakens your godship if you're constrained by logic. I don't know. It opens up some questions I have here, but anyways, let's keep going.
But God cannot do what is logically impossible. He cannot make a square circle or a one-ended stick. So can...
Right. So God is constrained by the logic. So he was fine-tuned. God was fine-tuned. Well, who fine-tuned God? Who made those constraints?
God make a rock so big that he can't lift it? No. So what if, when God created human beings, he wanted them to be free? Freedom's a good thing. But if humans are to be free, they cannot be forced to obey God. Because freedom without choice is like a square circle.
Yeah, but freedom without influence is a square circle. It's not logical because free from what? Free from constraints? Aren't we limited and constrained by the laws of physics, the laws of God? Even God is constrained. He isn't free to create outside of a logical possibility, is he? So even his freedom is constrained in some way. So there is no ultimate free will. And does God know everything in advance that's going to happen? If he does, then that just demonstrates that the world unfolds according to a determined path, right? But let's not get too far. Let's see what they say.
It's a logical contradiction. No choice, no freedom. God didn't want robots. He wanted real people. The first humans endowed with the awesome power of free choice abused their freedom. The tragic consequences of their bad choice and our bad choices ripple across the world. God is responsible for the fact of freedom, but humans are responsible for their acts of freedom.
Well, that's debatable. That right there would be debatable in my view. Because if evil comes about from freedom, and God is the one who granted the freedom to be evil, then he's at least partially responsible for the evil that happens in the world, right? And again, if God is all-knowing, he knew that by creating free will agents, that it would give birth to evil and suffering. So that makes evil and suffering responsible to God. God is responsible for that, rather. That's the logic that I'm going with. But maybe they'll square this circle somehow. Let's see.
But let's remember, we don't suffer alone. God will put an end to suffering and evil. And God became a man to suffer with us. God is good, and he wants real people like you to know him. But the free choice is yours.
Now that answer only opens the door, right? It just talks about free will, because in order to have love, you got to have free will, but free will often also opens up the problem for evil. Now, I made a mistake in answering your question. Here's the mistake I made. Normally, well, there's really two answers to this question. Well, there's a lot of answers, but there's two categories of answers. The question I should have asked you back is, why do you ask the question? Right? Because if you're asking the question for...
And that's what Frank Turek does. He always answers questions with questions. You'll notice that about a lot of his apologetics when he's in conversation with people. Well, what do you mean by evil? What do you mean by free will? What do you mean by God? What do you mean by this or that or the other thing? Just something I noticed. He never really answers directly. It gets into like a word game or a semantical word game to try to cross you up and get you to sound like you're crazy, like you're contradicting yourself. I noticed that a lot.
From an academic perspective, if God, why evil? This is how you answer it. But if you're asking the question from, you just experienced a personal tragedy, this is not how to answer it. Right? You don't need a philosopher, you need a pastor. So I actually just made a mistake answering that question. Because, you think, I got a good slide for this. No, wrong answer, right? Now, hopefully, you're not going through a personal tragedy, so I just didn't insult you.
No, it's fine.
Okay, good.
Well, I mean, if it's not good, I mean, that's the whole point with evil and suffering, is it's very real. So we talk about it outside of an emotional scenario or situation, and we give these sort of cold, callous answers. But those are supposedly the real answers to give, right? So I guess basically saying the truth hurts. Fine, but we'll look at the possible problems. And if you guys have any suggestions about any sort of issues you see with his answers, just post it up. Let's discuss it too.
But no, because there's a pastoral answer and a philosophical answer.
Oh, that's all it is. Man. Oh, well. Well, still, we can talk about this stuff. I don't know. For me, the problem of evil, it kind of just proposes a deep tension in the idea of that all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good God. So if God knows every future outcome, then the existence of unnecessary suffering is not just, foreseen, but it was knowingly permitted. And that's kind of my issue with the Christian God stuff. Appealing to free will doesn't really resolve it, because, when you create free will agents, it doesn't logically constrain an omnipotent being. God could have created agents who freely chose the good more often, or worlds with less gratuitous suffering. You know what I'm saying? So if God could have created that way and he didn't, that means, he already knows with certainty how it was going to turn out. He knows how every free choice will unfold. And then freedom doesn't really explain why this particular distribution of suffering exists rather than a better one. You know what I mean? Why this extreme and not a little less extreme? So the problem isn't merely emotional, it's logical. And, in light of omniscience seems to collapse the distance between allowing evil and then intending it, leaving free will defense really kind of under pressure, at least, That's always been my issue with that. Yeah, fuckface Frank Turek, the apologist so evil that even other creation apologists call him out. Yeah, and there's this thing that we talk about too in the Bible that's called predestination. And some Christians embrace it and some people don't, because of this whole free will argument, right? But there are scriptures like Ephesians 1:4-5. I've got it open right here. It says, even as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and blameless before him. In love, he predestined us for adoption to himself. Ephesians or Romans 29 says, for those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. So God knows beforehand, who's going to heaven, who's going to be the chosen one. John 15:16, Jesus, you did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should abide, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give it to you. So Jesus says that he chose them. They didn't choose him, right? John 6:44, no one comes to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I will raise him on the last day. So all of this salvation stuff is predestined, chosen by God, apparently, according to these scriptures. But, in Christianity, it's all about cherry picking which scriptures, and it's very interpretive, because all books and all literature is interpretive, to be fair. But, some things seem a little more clear than others. And you have to explain your interpretation and make it consistent, because it seems to me that predestination would be consistent with an all-knowing God. And what does the Bible say about God being all-knowing? 1 John 3:20, I got it right here. It says, for whenever our hearts condemn us, God is greater than our heart, because he knows everything. God knows everything. So all of this relating to the problem of evil is the fact that God knows beforehand all of the suffering that would emerge out of his world, out of creating free will agents and so forth, according to the Christian apologists, right? Let's see, go back to the chat. Joel says the idea that we all have free will and that we behave differently is because of something about ourselves that makes us act differently using our free will. But the thing theists miss is that whatever that difference is also because that's how the Creator made us to be. Exactly. Right. Exactly. It's a reflection of God. Everything is. And Isaiah 45:7 says, I create the good and the evil. I create all these things. I am the Lord. So that's consistent. If God is the first cause of everything, then everything that comes out of it, God has to be at least partially responsible. If he gave us free will, great. But he foreknew what was going to happen, didn't he? So I just wonder, like, how, I've never really heard any strong arguments for how this problem is alleviated. Now I've heard like open theists will argue that, well, God is limited. God is constrained. That's the nature of God. Which is kind of like saying that God is just the universe as we see it, which, they say, well, yeah, the universe reflects God. But God is the metaphysic. He's the foundation. He's the ontology of this universe. So everything you see in the universe, the good, the bad, the chaos, the order, all of that comes from God's nature. That's his nature. He's constrained to those things as well. But he's much more powerful. He evolves just like the universe. And God is like that extra step. You just can't have the universe doing all these things. You have to have something controlling the universe in all these kind of ways. And God is synonymous with that. It's like a mirror reflection of the universe, or the universe is a mirror reflection of God. Then it seems like God would have no free will, and then God is just part of the universe, part of the laws that that we describe the patterns, by. The patterns of the universe, just brute fact. They are what they are. They do what they do. They're just going to roll out the way that they do. So God seems to be, in that case, just an extra step. But that being aside, it makes me wonder if God is really something worthy of worship. If God has no choice but to allow evil and everything that's going to happen, then what's the point of praying to this God or trying to get salvation from this God? You may not have been, you were determined to go to hell, or you were determined not to. But usually a lot of these open theists are universalists, where they feel like everyone's going to go to heaven in the end anyways. But then it just takes all the meaning away from believing, because why even care then? If we're all going to get the reward, then what's the motivation and the suffering and the, going through whatever you have to go through because of your beliefs? Didn't Jesus say, I suffered, therefore you will suffer in my name, even worse things or whatever? Those are the questions that I have. I mean, doesn't mean that none of it's true. I'm not saying that it's not true or anything. I don't know that 100%, but I just don't believe it. I don't believe it because there's a lot of questions that are unanswered for me. Any Christians out there, if you want to jump in, you can. I don't know if we have any Christians out there. Looks like we only have a few people in the audience, but I'll open up the stage. I have some time. So if you want to come on stage and discuss it, if you have any ideas or possible resolutions to the problem of evil, man, I'd love to hear them, man. Joel, message Paul, because Paul's a theist and he does give a defense of the problem of evil. So yeah, that'd be interesting. I'd like to see what what he could contribute to that. Because usually it's always the free will defense, or it's the defense that, you have to have contrast. In other words, there would be no love without hate, because everything is sort of defined by its opposite. And I can go along with that. Like, I can go along with suffering, but I guess my question is, why this much? Like, could it be better? Could the world have a little less suffering and still have the value of contrast? I think so. I don't think that a lot of what we see in the world is necessary to that extent. James, how you doing, sir?
Hey there. Good morning. I'm doing great. How about you?
Doing good, man. Doing good.
Awesome.
Yeah. You have any thoughts on the problem of evil, or have you ever heard anything compelling, at least a little bit more than just the free will defense?
No, I mean, I don't think there's a way to justify it. So some Christians realize there's no way to justify it. And so they just say, well, wait until after you're dead. God will explain it to you, and he'll explain it to me too. We just don't know. Right? Which is really just a thought-stopping exercise. The same as saying that, well, we're not qualified to assess the merits of God and his plan or his intentions, which is also just a thought-stopping exercise that says don't think about it too much. So there's just really not a good way to justify the extremes of suffering that are in this world. And I'm not talking about my life, right? And religious people tend to assume that if I say, well, why does God allow so much suffering? What they hear is me saying, why does my life suck if there's a real God? But I'm not saying that at all, right? I've seen and heard about things that are so beyond the pale, that are so outrageously horrific. And I'm like, why would a God allow that to happen? It just doesn't make any sense to me. There's never going to be a suitable apologetic for it because it cannot be justified.
Yeah, I mean, people can imagine stuff like, and that's all it really is it would, even if you came up with something we could all agree on, it would just be imaginary. It would be something to make up an excuse for why it exists or whatever. Like, I don't know. Let me ask you this. Is it moral? Would it be immoral for a person to choose to suffer? And I mean, really suffer. Like, if a person, like, I don't know, they weren't crazy, they had all their mental faculties there, and they willingly chose to go through some excruciating suffering for some reason, would that be immoral for that person to willingly choose that?
Well, I mean, I can imagine a scenario where, for example, somebody suffers horribly so that they can protect or provide for somebody that they love, right? You give up an organ and the doctors tell you that your life's going to be pretty rough after you lose that organ, but you can technically survive. Or you take the blame for something in like legal matters, right? To protect your child, and you're the one that goes to prison for something you didn't do, but maybe your child didn't do it either or something. Like, there's any number of circumstances where somebody could choose to suffer for somebody else, and in doing so, I think that that's fine. But just to arbitrarily choose to suffer for no one else's benefit, I just don't know that that's ever a thing. Not intentionally. People do things to themselves that cause suffering, because of the way they eat, or they smoke, or they drink. But these are maladaptive coping mechanisms where they're trying to actually get away from suffering, and incidentally causing long-term down the road even more suffering for themselves. But it's not because they were trying to suffer. So, like, someone just intentionally suffering horribly for the sake of suffering, I don't know. I can't think of any good examples. You can think of bad ones. Jesus on the cross, for example, right? Where he's not really benefiting anybody to do the thing, but he does it to himself anyways. He commits the Iron Age equivalent of self-unaliving by cop, right? And he does this for religious reasons. If we humor the idea that it happened, right? And there's been a lot of martyrs over the centuries for religious reasons. They choose to suffer in order to win favor with God, or prove how pious they are, or or to advertise for their religion. Look, I'm willing to suffer horribly for my religion. That must be true, which isn't good reasoning. But a lot of people go, oh, wow, that's lovely. Like, how's that a marketing thing? But it is.
Mhm.
People are like, wow, cool. It must be real. And so, I do see people voluntarily putting themselves through horrible suffering or death for fantasy-based reasons, and they imagine that these are good reasons. But I do see that as a form of self-abuse, right? Jesus in the stories
Mm.
abused himself
Mhm.
egregiously, and he did so for reasons that I think are unjustifiable ethically and rationally. Um, Unless the Trinitarians are right, in which case he didn't really suffer at all, technically, because it was just a meat puppet controlled by one of God's multiple personalities to do puppet theater so that he could forgive himself for the failings he gave us in the first place, right? It's irrational as hell, but how much did he really suffer up there when it's just a puppet body in the first place? I don't know, right?
Right.
So my answer is I just don't think that there's a way to judge. Nobody ever just chooses to suffer horribly for what seems to them to be no reason. If somebody chooses it, it's because they think they've got a reason to choose it. And it is a form of self abuse unless you're doing it as a necessity to protect somebody else.
That's a good point. Good point. And the reason I bring this up, and this is kind of interesting. So I look at a lot of videos regarding AI and like the progression and stuff like that. And I ran across one video that was kind of interesting to say the least. But there's actually people talking about some of the fallout from AI that's coming up. And I'll loop this in and tell you how this applies to the problem of evil and everything else. So here's the thing. So a group of researchers said, okay, by a particular time frame based on how the trajectory of AI progression is going, right? They say that very soon it's going to get to the point where there will be no jobs for humans. We won't have to work. And there's different ways that this could play out, and they go through all the different ways. This could be collapse of society or usher in like a utopia. So, anyways, one of the things they worked at was, well, let's go see what the utopian side looks like. They say, well, on the utopian side, the way it plays out is that you won't have to work. Everyone is supported in the world. There are enough resources that everyone can survive. Knowledge is abundant. AI, super AI, it knows everything. So everyone knows everything. There's nothing to learn. So let's look at human nature. For humans to thrive or be balanced psychologically, they have to have 3 pillars met. And one of those is they have to have challenge, and they have to have status, and they have to have novelty, which means curiosity. So those are the 3 pillars, the 3 main pillars of human ape psychology, right? But if AI takes care of all of our problems, provides for everything we ever need, and knowledge is abundant, then those pillars go away. And then what happens is humans have no challenge. There's no reason to fight for status because everyone's equal. And knowledge is abundant. Everyone can know everything equally at any moment in time for everything. So this begs the question, like, what can we do in a world like that? It seems like that would be just another form of like a human zoo. Like we would be living in a human zoo, and that can't be good, right? So they said what would happen, the way out of that is you would create simulations, like ancestor simulations. Like you would plug away from this world and you would try to immerse yourself in a world of challenges, status, and curiosity.
People already do that with video games.
Yeah, we already do that now. That's what they were saying, that we kind of already do that now. So it's pretty predictable that we could wipe our memory so that we could start fresh, be born into an ancestor simulation, and live a normal life, a life that we evolved from, one that requires a lot of challenges, suffering, gives you a chance to be to be a hero, or to be a coward, or whatever you want in your simulation, whatever life you want to live. Like, maybe you're so fucking bored of this life in this human zoo, you just want the worst of the worst. Some people want it a little better. Some people want to be a rock star. Some people want to be whatever, a bum on the street. It just depends on each person. And some people may choose to just live in the zoo and never, hardly ever go into the alternative reality. Maybe they just like being in the zoo. There's all kinds of different people. But this could be, then when you think about taking that and applying it to theology, like it's called the soul choice theodicy. And it's sort of the same thing, that when souls live in some other, reality, call it heaven or whatever, then they'll say that, you get bored of just being a perfect being in heaven, where you, just like in the simulation or the AI world, the human zoo, you're just in a zoo. And so you choose to come into the world as some kind of animal or some kind of human or whatever you want. And so then the problem of evil goes away, because it was all chosen. It was chosen for a reason, for a rational reason. So that's somewhat, but again, this is all just imaginary. But do you think that if that were true, if that were the case, would that dissolve the problem of evil in your mind?
No, I don't see how it could, because while we're plugged into these virtual environments, if that's what happens, we're still going to have physical bodies, and so there's still going to be, babies born with birth defects, or humans suffering from diseases, both human caused and not human caused forms of disease, and there's still going to be, not everybody's going to have their needs met, let alone perfectly, and so. I just don't think that we're going to get rid of extreme forms of suffering to happen to be incidental. There's going to be people that still want to live off grid, people that can't afford to be plugged into a proper matrix. It's not like the government's going to say, well, we feel so bad for the people that are stuck in the sobering reality that we're going to give them a free high-speed internet access, a powerful computer, and unlimited access to this like special network where they can plug in and lose themselves in a comforting fantasy. The only way the government would do that is if they could farm you in your connection to that fantasy, where they can plug so many commercial goods and services or data collect and exploit your data. If there's some way that they can farm you, then they might be willing to do that. But in which case, it's still going to work to the detriment of the people. It always hurts the people that are farmed in some way or another. And so suffering is going to continue. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I was thinking, if technology even got to that point where all knowledge, all needs, all things were met, then you wouldn't even have an oversight government at all anyways. Because what need would there be of that? Like, it would just be governed by the artificial super intelligence, right?
Well, we can, but I do think that people in power would be like, sure, we could structure our society in a way that we don't have to have a centralized government. But we like being in power, and we like being able to exploit people and dominate people, and they're not going to give that up, even if there is a technological way where they can. Like, if they're not really needed, they're going to say, well, let's try to engineer the system so that we are still needed, or at least we can stand on the premise of still being needed and convince people of it so that we can maintain power and privilege.
Yeah, and that goes into the control issue. Like, I don't know if you keep up, like I keep up with a lot of this super AI progress every day. And one of the things they say is we're going to get to a point, we may be there already, but I don't think so. Most people don't think so. But some people say that we will get to the point where it will be out of control. In other words, the technology is going to get so powerful, we're going to already see the danger. It's going to say, well, we're going to be out of control because these AGIs can sort of program themselves and evolve themselves up. And then their knowledge is exponential growth. Just within 6 months, they'll be twice as smart as humans, in a year, 4 times, and then, on and on. And so they say, well, there comes a point where you say, well, let's just pull the plug because we're out of control, and let's try to come up with some constraints or start from scratch. But the problem is China's 2 months behind us. So if we unplug, that doesn't guarantee that China won't unplug. And then if China keeps on progressing, soon they're going to outperform us. And then they've got this monster on the loose anyways, and there's nothing we can do about it.
Right, that's the thing I wanted to mention too. It's this: every time there is a discovery, some kind of an advancement in our scientific knowledge or tools, and there's an opportunity to weaponize that, to use it to exploit other people, to gain an unearned, undeserved power, etc. The nations, the super powerful billionaire corporations and nation states, they're going to utilize that technology whether we want them to or not. So if America, for example, were to vote and say, hey, let's slow down on the AI, or let's slow down on gene editing because we're worried about eugenics or whatever, or let's slow down on whatever other things we've discovered, other nations like China's going to say, oh yeah, you guys go ahead and slow down, that works out fine for us. They're going to push forward, obligating us to reignite those systems and try to keep up. It's the technology dominates us already, because and there's just no way to avoid that paradox. We're in it. We're stuck in it. And so this is also the case. Recently, it was discovered that they could use the rabies virus, to modified version of it, to track neural nets, to look at what's really happening in the structure of the brain. And they combined that with the use of psilocybin and similar drug compounds. And what they discovered is that they could re-engineer somebody's personality. They can change somebody's framing of identity and how they relate to the world around them by redirecting their focus in this transitive state where they're under the effect of psilocybin, and you can redirect their attention to have them notice. You can completely restructure the personality. And now that people have realized this, there's going to be billionaire corporations that are going to further invest in this technology so that they can further refine it. And in doing so, they're going to create means by which they can dampen people's conscience in war. They're going to be able to engineer super soldiers, because we can edit their genes, even in babies, right? So they're going to end up with these factories that mass produce babies that are going to be future soldiers. And I know this sounds conspiracy theorist, but once there's an opportunity for a significant power increase, a predatory capitalism-driven nation like America or China, even though China is not officially capitalist, they still have a capitalist infrastructure. They still have no choice but to utilize capitalism in order to further the gearing of their societal machinery and their governmental machinery. They have no choice, and they're pretty damn good at it, honestly. In fact, it's scary how much better at it they are than we are. And so, in the meantime, they're just going to push forward with that. Of course, they're going to say, how can we use these new understandings and engineer better soldiers, better workers, be more competitive? And so, if America has a conscience to say these technologies are dangerous and unethical, we need to really restrict them, all that's going to do is put us at a disadvantage, right? In the global competition that's going to continue to evolve. And billionaire special interest entities, they're not going to hold back either, because they want to cash in on it. And so we're screwed no matter what. All these different things, we're like, we need to slow down on AI, and we need to be careful about gene editing, and we need to be worried about like how to like do psyop manipulation of people's entire psychological infrastructure. Now that those technologies are there, they're going to push forward whether we want them to or not.
You know, I saw that a couple weeks ago. I read in a paper that talked about how a person could change their entire personality, character. It helps with trauma, personality defects, just by putting yourself in a suggestive state through psilocybin. And this sort of rewires the brain, because consciousness has a way of rewiring your brain. It's called brain plasticity. And it's where what you learn, under certain condition, or really any condition, rewires the brain every day. So if you learn more things, you're creating these physical things. So it's almost like it's imposing itself on the physical structures of your brain.
Right.
Which we've known that for a while. But now we've understood that by using psilocybin, you are more easily to learn on a fast track, because it puts your consciousness into a certain mode where this learning becomes very deeply profound and everything like this. And
Yeah.
I read that article and I was like, wow, I definitely want to do a show about this, because this is something that I'm very interested in. I thought it was amazing. In fact, I'm really surprised this isn't more known. Like it should be. This is like, for me, and maybe it's just because I'm sort of a consciousness kind of person, you know, I'm one of those guys.
Yeah.
So, but maybe for most people, they don't really care about this kind of stuff. But I thought it should be like front page news. But then I saw this other guy had a video responding to it when I was looking for more information on it. And I think he was talking about it being used as a psyop, like kind of what you were just describing.
Yeah.
And so then I started kind of going online and kind of just kicking the idea around. And most people were like, oh, that's all bullshit. The study is flawed. It's bullshit. There's no such thing like that. And the psyop is just more conspiracy theory. It's bogus. In other words, it was just like dismissed. Most people just like, and I'm talking about intelligent people that are in the field. They're like, don't listen to this. This is just, clickbait.
Right.
But I was like, but I don't think so, because I got this information from a real peer-reviewed journal.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, I've noticed too. Like I've gone to specialists, like neurologists, for example, and I'll ask him something about my own neurological health, and I'll mention a case study or a recent scientific realization about how the human mind works. And the neurologist would tell me, that's not a thing. I don't know where you're getting information from. Stop reading propaganda. And I try to tell him, like, look, this is from Harvard, or this is from some other like really reputable place. And here's the studies that they're doing. And here's, I can give you the code and everything for it. And he's like, nope, I don't even want to hear it. People get so set in their ways, especially the older doctors, the older specialists. They get so set in a certain framing of what science can and can't do, and what we can and can't know about, the body or the human mind or behaviors, that they cannot break free from that paradigm. And so when this information comes out, they just can't adapt to it.
It's sad, because you start to lose trust. You start, well, who do I trust?
Yeah.
Like, and then, like I've seen certain cases where I've had this conversation, and it was on even other kind of cutting edge stuff. I think this was like 15 years ago. I was talking to some of these sort of people about quantum biology.
Yeah.
That was a very new thing 15, 20 years ago, right? And so, but it was also considered very cutting edge, sort of like tinfoil hat type stuff.
Sure. But
there were papers on it, like peer-reviewed papers, and I would bring those up, and most of the people in that field would say, oh, don't listen to that. If I gave you a penny for every paper that came out pushing some kind of woo-woo, even if it's peer-reviewed, you'd be a millionaire by now. Like, you can't listen to everything. It's like, oh, okay. But then now it's a thing, like photosynthesis and, DNA, all these quantum connections, quantum tunneling when it comes to the sense of smell and stuff like that. Like now it's just common knowledge, and they even have PhDs you can get as a quantum biologist. So it just makes you wonder, can you really trust a lot of these experts? Maybe it's like you say, they're just so dug in to their old, for what they've been taught, that now they're no longer open to new information. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's just a common human feeling. I think it's not universal, but it's not rare for people to have these kinds of limits where they just can't adapt to the changing paradigm of scientific understanding. They just can't.
Yeah. Interesting stuff, man. And but as far as problem of evil, I don't see it either. I'm kind of with you. Even in a scenario like in that thought experiment, the fact that even if you could wipe your memory out and choose to go into a simulation where you die as an infant or something like that, or suffer for days and days as an infant, like with I don't know, Harlequin's disease or something like that. Is it justified? I don't think so. I think you're still culpable of hurting yourself.
Right. So here, interesting thing about consent. Consent requires, one, that it be fully informed consent, and it also requires that the consent is withdrawable. If you run a machinery, a matrix that people can pay you to plug them into, and they have chosen to subject themselves to a certain kind of prolonged suffering in the matrix for some reason, and if the thing is, if they've never experienced that form of suffering, they don't really know what they're getting themselves into, which means it's not fully informed consent because it can't be. And two, once they're in the matrix, if they honestly believe that it's real and if they can't remember that it's not, then they can't withdraw their consent, which means the moment that that's true, it's no longer true consent, no matter what they signed before you plugged them in. And so I think that this ethical consideration needs to be greatly weighed if somebody were to design such a system.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, even that applies to like the soul theodicy,
Mhm.
the soul choice theodicy, that we were souls that decided to forget who we were, to live out this mortal life of questioning God and existence and suffering and evil. And that seems like that doesn't seem very because then it becomes an identity problem too. Like some people could say, well, immorality only applies to other people. Like if you hurt yourself, there's nothing immoral to hurt yourself. Even if you believe that, which I don't.
I don't either. I think self-harm is also unethical or immoral.
It's unethical, right?
Yeah.
It's unethical. That's the thing. To me, that's
because you matter, and two, only a very unhealthy person would choose to subject themselves intentionally to unhealth where there's nobody else benefits from your unhealth, right? And three, you actually end up hurting other people with your unhealth, because the more incapacitated we are in our physical health, the more it affects our mental health, which in turn affects the way that we behave in the world, which becomes a problem for other people as a chain reaction. And so nobody's an island. We don't live in a vacuum. And so we each are an integral part of a larger living, breathing whole of human social systems, human ecosystem, like the larger ecosystem. And so the more we harm ourselves, the more we inadvertently harm other people. And so this idea that people have a right to harm themselves is an outdated idea, because it didn't understand the way that we're interconnected.
In my philosophy, like with non-dual philosophy, I believe that I'm sort of a new person all the time. Like your personhood is sort of like the self is sort of an illusion. It's kind of like a construction.
Yeah, it's a
But
story.
as you go through life, you sort of change. I'm not the same person I was when I was a child.
Yeah.
Obviously, I like new things. I'm a different person. But I'm still a conscious entity. I still have that sort of continuity. I can remember when I was a child. I can remember all of these things. But if you cut off your memory and you're no longer that soul thing up in heaven, that godlike thing, and now you're this particular, this sort of expression of consciousness on, as an embodied human or whatever.
Yeah.
You're a different person. It could be argued.
Yeah.
You're still a different person. So you're really causing suffering to a different person that didn't ask for none of that shit.
Right.
You know what I mean? So even if that were all true, it still, in my view, is evil, because you're creating suffering for someone who didn't voluntarily ask for that shit.
Right. And so I think of my past selves as ancestor selves. So
Yeah.
I've inherited their memories, like genetic memory.
Mhm.
And because I inherited their memory, and because I inherited a trajectory in life that directly traces back to where they were and where they were heading, I identify compulsively as an extension of the prior expression of self, because I inherited the memories in the framework of identity. But if I think about it logically and factually, I'm not really that person, right? And so anything that that person did that sabotaged the reality I woke up into today, they harmed me. They did a thing selfishly that harmed a future person, a descendant of lineage, right? They harmed their descendant. I am their descendant. They're my ancestor. But because we share the same genetics, and because we one moved into the next, right? I know this probably makes sense to you, but a lot of people wouldn't be able to follow what I'm saying. But yeah, so we identify in a way as an older version of that person. And in a way, that's true. And I always think of like the flame on the candle. You light the flame on the candle. In that moment, it's the fire that you lit. But a few seconds later, it's not. As a practical frame of reference, we say it's the same fire that we lit, but it's not really, because that fire is gone. It's already been recycled into the universe. It's been transformed into some form of energy. The heat and the light and the fuel that was being burned in that moment that defined the fire that we lit is already gone. It's been replaced seamlessly by new expressions of fire burning, all new fuel. This is new light. This is new heat. This is new everything. And so in that way, we are very much the same way. We have this sense of continuity because we've seamlessly replaced they who were here before, and we inherited their memories, which gives us a common framework of identity. But we're really not the same person. And like in a very literal way, we're not.
Right. We're not like larvas and butterflies. Like one experiment where they taught in a lab, they taught like the larva to go to food at a certain place and do different things. So it remembered to do that. But then it gets to the stage where it becomes a butterfly, right?
Yeah.
So it transfers into this butterfly. Well, the butterfly remembered where to get all the food and stuff like that, even though it lost its old neuron, its old schematic blueprint, its brain and stuff like that. It passed down epigenetically all that information. And they said something like that happens with all organisms in some way, like you were saying, like it reminded me of an experiment they did with World War II Holocaust grandkids of Holocaust survivors, right? And some of the Holocaust survivors went through excruciating, traumatic events. And it turns out that in these experiments that their grandchildren sort of inherited a lot of these phobias and fears epigenetically. And they did the same thing. They did it like to test it on rats. They put like, grandparents of these rats, they knew where to go to get water. If they went to this other spigot, it would shock them. So they always went to this one water spigot. Well, their children and grandchildren didn't have to be taught that stuff. They just went to the water spigot.
Right.
It's almost like they inherited the memory of the trauma. The feeling was so bad that they inherited it, epigenetically, they say.
Right. So somebody
it's kind of the same thing, like, are they culpable of the things we inherit?
Right. Yeah. If somebody were to Google search genetic memory, there's some really fascinating stuff that comes up, and some of it has citation like Scientific American Journal. So it's definitely a worthy topic to dive into.
That those experiences get passed down, but the difference, though, you couldn't really hold them culpable morally because they didn't know. It's all done out of you're just living your life. You're having children. I have children. No one's consciously, intentionally trying to. Now, I saw this other thought experiment. You may find this interesting, where I think it was a philosopher in the 80s. He had a thought experiment based on some true events or whatever. But there's this lady who she likes a lot of attention from people. She just craves it. It's like a mental disorder. She likes a lot of attention. So she had a cousin who had a child, and she noticed the family showered her with a lot of attention. So she goes, so I think I'll have a child, but I want my child to be handicapped. That way I'll get more attention.
Yeah.
and so you think, is she morally culpable of bringing a handicapped child in the world? Let's say you ask the handicapped child, is he glad to be alive or not? And he'd say, well, I think she's a bitch because she took a pill or something to make me handicapped coming out. So, it raises the question, like, where does the moral culpability stand in a situation like that, as opposed to, say, someone who decided to have a child. They didn't really want the child to be handicapped, but it was born handicapped. And then you could say, well, who's morally culpable for that child being handicapped? And the child would say, well, who's to say that I didn't want, I think there was one instance where a handicapped child, this pastor or somebody, this atheist or somebody was making the argument that, why would God bring about handicapped people so they can suffer in the world? And this handicapped kid says, well, I'm glad to be alive, like,
Yeah.
I'm glad to be here. I don't care that my handicap is only a problem for you,
Yeah.
So there's a different response from different people. The person who was just born that way for happenstance didn't have a problem with being handicapped. The kid who was born to the mother who intentionally had a handicapped child, there was a moral problem with that,
Yeah. Well, sure. A better way to frame that for the guy that made the point was to say that I'm glad that as long as somebody with a handicap is glad to exist, then I too am glad for them that they exist. However, I would expect in their shoes that I would rather exist without the handicap.
Mhm.
And so if somebody wants to choose a handicap, fine. I don't know who would, but
Right.
the fact that these are thrust upon people who didn't choose it seems pretty unjust to me, because even though there are some people that acclimate to it and it's just it doesn't burden them too much, there are other people with the same handicap or similar that are incredibly burdened by it because
Mhm.
it sits differently for them.
Yeah.
And so the larger point could still be made where a person hearing it happens to have that handicap and is glad to be alive could say, yeah, I can get on with that. Like, I can understand how this might weigh differently with some other people, and that it's not really a fair universe to be born into where we don't have a choice in the matter.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's just the way it seems to me. It seems like we live in a universe where all these things are possible. Incredibly evil acts, unjustified suffering, but also, good and all of that stuff.
Sure.
And yeah, it's all kind of defined in contrast, but really what just kind of stumps me is, why does it have to be to the extent that it is? Like, could it, yeah, we need contrast to make meaning. And if there is a God or there is a purpose teleologically for that, then does it have to be so extreme? Does it have to be so crazy? Like, some of it just seems so unnecessary to me.
Right.
And I don't understand it. Like, maybe if it wasn't so bad, maybe I could see it. But
Right. I don't know. Like, even the religious people that say, well, we need some suffering so we can appreciate when we're not suffering, or we need
Mhm.
some hate so we can appreciate love. And I'm like, well, if that's the case, then heaven's got a problem, right? Because
Right.
if heaven doesn't have those problems, then the good things are going to lose meaning to them.
Right.
And in the meantime, it's like, again, consent matters for something, right? And I don't think you can make it come right later to say just as a god intentionally made a lot of people suffer horribly, but I'm gonna make it come right later. They'll be thanking me for it. I'm like, consent still matters, dude. Like, let people
Mhm.
decide if they're gonna sign up for that program or not. Don't just make it happen to people. Don't do that. And in the meantime, but this is a monotheistic problem, right? Polytheists don't have the problem of evil because they can always just say, well, Aphrodite's not the cause of this problem. Zeus is, or Hades is, or whatever. Right?
Yeah, polytheist. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
monotheism created its own critical flaw because now the onus only can go one direction, right? You
Mhm.
have to place it in the hands of the one all powerful God, and their way of creating Satan as a scapegoat for it's not God's fault, you got to blame Satan, or it's not God's fault, you got to blame Adam and Eve. And I'm like, no, it would still be God's fault, right? Because no one forced God in this story that we know is a fable, anyways. But even if you pretend it's real, nobody forced God to curse all of their descendants with failings that they didn't get to choose, right? And nobody told God he had to stand back with arms folded and watch all these horrors unfold, much of which are not really the fault of the people that suffer the horrors. And so it still doesn't make it come right. It's just that I think a lot of religious people are stuck in this paradox where they have this abusive father deity that will reward them if they say he's not abusive, even if he is, and will punish them horribly if they say that he is abusive, right? This is an incredibly abusive situation for them to be in, but they're stuck in it because they've allowed it to become the framework of their identity.
Oh yeah, God will fuck you up if you don't believe in him. And he creates the scenario. He creates you to be an imperfect liar, like the Bible says, find all men liars and God true and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So he creates dishonest people that you're supposed to trust when they present a holy book to you.
Right.
And then when you don't follow the commandments of the holy book perfectly and you don't do the things perfectly, God will fuck you up. Yet he's a loving God. All of these sort of weird counter qualities.
Yeah.
And if you question any of it, God's going to fuck you up for that too.
Right. And they try to weak a lot of that. They say, well, questions are allowed. I'm like, yeah, but questions are only allowed in your religion within the framework, right? You're allowed to question, like, how come God did this, or how does God do this other thing? But you have to frame the question in the context of, I'll accept whatever answer you give me, or I'll accept it even if you don't have an answer. I'll just say, oh, well, no problem. I'll wait till after I die to find out. And you have to assume that the religion's narrative is true and then ask within that framework. And so it's the assumption that it's not true, or the willingness to say that it's not true or not reasonable, that goes beyond the parameters of what they allow as a question. And so they're not really allowing free expression of ideas.
Oh, hell no. In fact, they'll say something equal to this, like, if the big bad wolf didn't exist, then how do you explain the house that was blown down?
Right.
It's like, if Jesus didn't resurrect from the dead, how do you explain the empty tomb?
Right, which is crazy. It's such obviously bad reasoning.
It's all part of the story. Like you said, you can only question within accepting the premise of the story.
Right. I remember watching an NCIS episode where they exhumed a grave to find out something about the dead person as evidence for the crime.
Yeah.
And the coffin was empty. And at no point did they go, oh my gosh, he must have resurrected from the dead. He must be God.
Yeah.
At no point did that happen.
It never applies in any other part of life. And these things only are supposed to apply when you read, when you're relating things about God.
Right.
Then everything's on the table, And then, for me, I just feel like it's such a insult to your intelligence for someone to kind of frame you and force you into their belief system, and when that was the one thing that always made me uncomfortable when I was a Christian, was I just felt like I have all these questions, and naively enough, I went to the elders of the church and asked about all these silly questions, and they were like, oh, they're just kind of like the academics you were talking about. Oh, don't listen to that. That's bullshit. That's
right.
That's just what they tell you. Don't listen to that. That's a dumb question. Don't even worry.
Right.
About
They did. Yeah. Religious people cherry pick.
Yeah.
What kind of even the answers to give. Right. When they say you're allowed to question, but what they mean is you have to accept whatever answer they give you, and their answers ultimately make it unfalsifiable. Right. They're either a thought-stopping exercise, or the answer is recontextualizes the entire narrative to be unfalsifiable. And since you can't falsify it, well, then now you need to accept it as true, right? And which is, of course, incredibly problematic reasoning. So I don't know what to do with it, right? And I tell Christians this all the time. I'm like, look, if you think that I'm unqualified to look at a particular religious narrative and find faults in it, because you say that equates to judging God, Well, then you can say the same thing about Hindus and about Muslims and about every Jehovah's Witnesses, right? If I'm
Mhm.
not qualified to intuit my way through, reason my way through the issues, if I'm not qualified to say this narrative doesn't quite add up in terms of data or in terms of arguments or in terms of ethics, if I'm unqualified to do that when it comes to Christianity, then I'm unqualified to do that with all the other religions too, and so are you. Which means you can't rule out any of the other religions either.
Yeah.
And so it's just a paradoxical situation that they're hoping you don't notice, right? With all the conflicts of interest and the unfalsifiability. And at the end of the day, it just doesn't add up. It just doesn't. And there's nothing we can do with that.
Right, right. Because for them, it's all about belief, and that's really the virtue that they're really signaling out here is that I believe, even though it's hard to believe it, I still believe it.
Right.
So I get a pat on the back for that. It's like, they live in a echo chamber that
Sure.
rewards just straight belief.
Yeah.
It's the virtue of belief. They don't care about evidence or anything like that.
Right.
And then we see that in society in general, like with politics and everything else. And that's why, I think it's always a good thing. I think it's also virtuous to question all kinds of assumptions, even of your current paradigm, because if you look into history, paradigms have always changed. The way we understood reality has always just been a reflection of that time period, the culture, and the institutions like the church or whatever.
Right.
That's where our understandings of reality were based on culture and language. And so they evolve, they change, and so do our paradigms. And so we're constantly able to question. We're not going to special plead and say, oh, well, this is the generation that has it all figured out.
Yeah.
We're the ones that know reality as it really is. I think that you can do that with any culture, anything like that. But
Sure.
just like with any other culture, just like today, they don't want you questioning the church. They don't want you
No.
questioning the beliefs that people have. It's all about belief. It's about supporting the paradigm, not questioning it. People don't like change at all.
Yeah, well, I mean, the conservative brain doesn't like change. It's afraid of
Right.
change, whereas the what they call the liberal brain structure with the smaller
Mhm.
amygdala on a different ratio of gray matter, and a different cultural experience as well. These are conducive to being open to change and not afraid of it. But Joel Davis makes a great contribution there that they've had
Mhm.
Christians tell them they can't question God, and then tell me that Islam can't be true because it's all about works of faith. So they're judging what God can and can't be like.
Right. Right.
Right. So the very thing that they say you're not allowed to do, they're doing it.
Yeah, and it goes even deeper. It's all sort of like even sometimes the fallacy of presentism is at play. Like, a Muslim will say, well, my morality is based on the morality expressed in the time of Muhammad. But it was a moral thing. It was considered immoral to worship trinities, and polytheism was considered immoral, according to those sort of cultures, right, and languages. But yet Judaism used to be a polytheistic religion. It wasn't always a monotheistic religion. It evolved over time. So you're just arbitrarily picking this particular time period in religious Abrahamic history to say what God really is. But in the Christian time period, oh no, God was a Trinity, which really it's debatable whether Jesus considered himself God back then anyways. But you know what I mean? It's like people just that's what religion does. It just promotes a particular narrative. And if you look at it, it was all created in a particular culture at a particular time.
Yeah.
And it just reflects that, it doesn't reflect the universe.
Right. Yeah. But most religious people don't know. They don't understand the cultures where these developed and what was going on at the time. They don't understand who wrote it, why they wrote it, right? So they just assume God authored it and people just obediently dictated things for gum. And that's not what historians say happened, right? And if you look at it, there's just too many coincidences. We know that certain ideas in these texts preceded the texts, that they were common ideas in the culture at the time, and that the writers had particular political and social reasons for pushing certain ideas. They were trying to counteract certain other ideas that they found problematic in society, or they're trying to push a narrative that put them in power. And so when we understand it as a cultural phenomenon and ways to structure social and political power, then it starts to make a whole lot more sense. We can appreciate the connection between that and their surrounding cultures and their circumstance.
Yeah, and sometimes we don't appreciate that rules were a little different in different cultures and different times. Like, like say Noah's flood story, that was borrowed from Assyrian, flood stories and things like that too, right? And a lot of this can be traced back to the trades that they did among it, or even the Babylonian exile. They were deeply influenced by the Babylonians, the Assyrians and stuff, for their religious understanding. And they sort of put that stuff the Hebrews put that influence into their own religious laws and structures and stories. And there was no shame in it. Like, it was okay. Like, I'm pretty sure it was no mystery that the Babylonians had a flood story, right? And the Jews just interpreted it in their own way too. They borrowed from it, right?
Yeah.
But now, in today's society, a Christian may try to refute that and deny that. And they'll say, oh, no, they would never do that. It's like, how do you know that? Maybe how do you know they share your same values? Like, I think it was a common thing to do that in the ancient world, to borrow and analogize things. Maybe it wasn't even meant as a real. I don't know. It's debatable, because they say that different cultures always sort of told stories to convey truths through stories and analogies, comparisons. That's the only way they knew to really convey information.
Yeah.
So, when we project our modern way of doing religion, we may really be just projecting that onto how we understand the Bible and stuff like that. So, it gets really hard to talk to people about this stuff, because they just have no interest in that.
Well, sure, they have a framing of reality that's heavily integrated with the framing of identity. And when somebody gets all of their sense of identity and value from a religious label, a culture, a connection, a story, right, whatever is providing for them or supplying to them as a dependent mind, to say, we get to tell you who you are in the world and how you are and why you are. We get to provide your framing of identity and value. Then people that are that dependent are going to be afraid to question the narrative or the labeling or the association, because it'll undermine the framing that they get a sense of value and identity from. Joel, hard to get into the minds of people who had lived thousands of years ago, right? This is why we need scholars. This is why we need historians, why we need people to understand, because if people rely on a church to tell them what was going on at that time, they're going to get bullshit.
That's right. And I love when I run across videos of people who came out of seminary and came out of their religious teaching, like the real religious teachings from academia. And a lot of these people will just use the seminar, the title, they get a PhD in religious studies and things like that.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they'll use it to promote their church and who they are as a pastor, or their apologist, or their profession at Christianity. But then I love to see videos where people actually use it to expose, the error that people are promoting out here in these churches and in Christian apologetics, because they also went to seminary, the same places that Frank Turek and them went, right?
Yeah.
and they'll say, look, what they're not telling you, and they'll start talking about all this other stuff, counterfactuals to these understandings and interpretations, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like Joshua Bowens, he's one of them.
Yeah.
I like hearing his he does a lot of ancient Hebrew and Assyrian study.
Yeah.
And he compares like the law of Hammurabi to the Torah, and slave laws, and what did slavery mean? Because there's a lot of Christian apologetics who say, oh, slavery wasn't in the Bible. That was voluntary servitude.
Right.
There was nothing immoral about it at all. But then you have people like Joshua Bowens who are actually scholars who can refute that bullshit,
Right.
So yeah, it's always good to see people bring out the facts, and yeah. But look, I'm gonna go ahead and get on off here. It's been over an hour. I've got to get back to work, but I appreciate you jumping through, James. Appreciate the support, man.
Yeah, I always like the time that we share together. I appreciate it too.
Hell yeah, man. And again, if you like the content, like and subscribe. Join the channel. Every Saturday we have a long session where we have everybody on stage and we freestyle and everything. So yeah, Joe, we'll see you later, man. We'll see you. And yeah, Joshua Bowen was the digital Hammurabi guy. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to post something in private chat because I don't have a wrench in the regular chat. Check this out when you can. It's a link to it. It's a clip from Dr. Joshua Bowen.
Okay, I'll put it right here also, so other people can see it, in case you guys want to take a look as well.
Awesome.
And I'll take a look at it right now. Thank you, man. I appreciate you.
Appreciate you too.
Yeah, you guys have a great day.
You too. Talk to you soon.